We've talked about how with politics you have policy, which is the core, most important part of these political discussions, and also messaging. And with our leaders, whenever we support their good policy, we also really need them to be good at messaging, the branding that comes along with politics. Otherwise, you can't be effective in implementing these policy agendas and making sure that whenever you do get legislative successes, that the American people know about them and know who is responsible for them. And so I have a moment for you here from MSNBC where Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg gets asked a question to that effect of, now that the infrastructure bill that was largely a Democratic success, it's a bipartisan infrastructure bill, so there's some Republican support there, but it was mostly Democrats and a part of Biden's larger agenda. Now that some of these projects are getting started and people are going to start noticing infrastructure improvements, for you, Pete Buttigieg, as the question is being asked, or the Biden administration, Democrats, how are you going to make sure that the American people know not just that the awesome part, the bridge is getting fixed or improved, or broadband's coming out to their community, and also who's responsible for that? And Pete Buttigieg had a good response here.
Your magnanimity is impressive in that moment, but I gotta ask, what is the Biden White House plan for making sure Americans know who voted for these projects? I think by my count, a majority of Republicans in the Senate voted against this infrastructure bill that's going to bring $110 billion for road and bridge repair, $39 billion to modernize transit, $7.5 billion in electric vehicle chargers. I mean, these are big investments that they voted against. So is there any kind of messaging strategy here to correct the wrongs?
Well, look, I think it's important for these members of Congress, for their constituents to know where they stood when we were fighting to get this money in the first place. Remember, this bill, even though it was bipartisan and even though we're proud of the strong bipartisan majorities that passed it in the end, this bill didn't come easy. It was declared dead multiple times. The president kept fighting for it. Congressional Democrats kept fighting for it. And some congressional Republicans crossed over to work with President Biden and work with Democrats to get it done. Many others stood in the way, denounced it as wasteful spending, denounced it as socialism. And of course, what's remarkable is it turns out they don't think it's socialism when it's coming to their districts. They think it's so great that they want to be at the press conference. They send press releases touting their advocacy for it. Sometimes they even describe themselves as having secured it, which
Tommy Tuberville looking at you.
Is obviously, it's hard not to chuckle at that, sitting in the Department of Transportation that's approving some of these grants, or knowing that other departments in the Biden-Harris administration are making the decision to send this funding to these constituencies. But I think what we're demonstrating is, look, we're going to send this funding where it's needed. And this is places that are red, blue, and purple. We're not going to punish any American for the short-sightedness of their elected officials.
Yeah. My message on this to Republicans would be, stop being tricked by, I guess, what is effective branding into supporting politicians that support bad policy. Because, and I'm also working on and advocating for and wanting Democrats to also be better at messaging so that the branding is more aligned with the better policy. But with something like this, and the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan, for so many people, if they were intimately aware of the details when it comes to the projects that will impact them and knowing who is responsible for it, most people would go, nah, I like that. I like that my prescription drug costs are going to be lower because of Democrats. I like that this bridge is going to be fixed because of Democrats. I like that I'm going to have ACA coverage extended because of Democrats. I like that, and on it goes. And I don't like that Republicans stood in the way at every turn of all these good policy positions. But so often the branding works and people are tricked into, in my mind, or branded into supporting politicians that just don't work in their material interests. And then the best example of the dishonesty of the messaging on the part of the GOP is when they'll call something, as Pete Buttigieg said, socialism. It's socialism. Oh my gosh, the socialist spending of the Biden administration. And then once these projects start getting rolled out, like the broadband with Tommy Tuberville, they'll brag about it as if they're responsible, where Tommy Tuberville sent out that tweet saying, so good to see 1 point something billion dollars of broadband investments being made in Alabama. And he stood against the very bill that made that possible. And we've seen other cases of that as well. That's the sign that they don't actually think it's bad or socialism. For some political reason, or because ideologically they don't like this amount of support going to low-income communities or whatever it might be, they're against it whenever it's their time to vote. But then often in the eyes of their constituents don't want them to know that. And that is really stunning. And Pete Buttigieg expands on that point here.
Finally able to do it. These are good projects. And, you know, look, the sign of a bad policy is the people who pushed it abandon it later on. The sign of a good policy is even the people who fought it and stood in the way at the time come to support it. I just wish they would be a little more straightforward and maybe even go so far as to acknowledge that they were wrong when they said that this infrastructure bill was a bad idea. And they were wrong to call it socialism.
Right. The lower third, Chiron was noting that another element of this bill is expanding access to clean drinking water for different communities. And these things matter. These policies matter and benefit people's lives. And so shame on Republicans, most of them that did not go along with this bill. And Democrats need to get better, as Pete Buttigieg is good at calling out Republicans for that and making clear to the American people, especially those who are currently supporting Republicans, that this policy is good, it benefits their lives, multiple sets of policies do, and Republicans every single step of the way stand against those very policies. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are able to be uploaded to the YouTube channel, plus get the bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, and there's a link in the description.